Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. Hey everyone, I want to do something a little different with this video, and that is I want to share a bit of my personal story, my personal journey, my ongoing odyssey, whatever you want to say, as it relates to the subject of anti-racism and the kind of cultural phenomenon of anti-racism. It's early March of 2021 as I record this, just to kind of timestamp it where we're at, because this conversation is so kind of shifting and so just progressing so quickly. I don't know what's going to happen in the news or in the media or whatever in the months, weeks, even after I record this. So to be more specific, it's March 8th, 2021 as I record this. But when I say the topic anti-racism, this is kind of the only introductory comment I'm going to make about this. When I say the word anti-racism, on the face of it, that word should just simply mean to be against racism, right? To be anti, to be opposed to racism. And if it was just that, virtually everybody I know, almost over the whole course of my life, everybody would be anti-racist, right? I don't know many people over the whole course of my life who would not want to be opposed to racism. But anti-racism is a term that has become more specific than that even, and it has become really a cultural phenomenon populated by speeches and books, training materials, think pieces like this one on YouTube, and it's been propagated, perpetuated by particularly two thought leaders, Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. Of course, there's others, but they're two of the ones that are the most popularly associated with anti-racism. And it's a more specific cultural thing than just the general idea to be against racism, interestingly. So it's kind of a cultural phenomenon. It means something more specific. And lots of people signal lots of different things about it, whether or not they are sufficiently anti-racist or whether they think the whole thing is, deplorable. There's just lots of people who have lots of different opinions about the term anti-racism, and that's because that term means something specific in our time. So what I want to do with this video is share a little bit, might be of interest to you, a few of you who are watching. Maybe you can relate to pieces of my journey. But I just kind of want to share my journey through it and kind of where I'm at with this whole topic, because it's a really important topic right now. And so what I'm going to do is this might go to 2 videos. I'm not sure. We'll see how long this takes. But I want to share my journey really in 3 parts, and then share some concluding thoughts and takeaways from where I'm at, things that I'm thinking about right now. So the 3 parts are, first, just some background, kind of where I come from. Relevant pieces from the first section of my life that kind of have prepared me in a certain way to hear this anti-racist rhetoric. So I'm going to share my background in that sense, and then I'm going to share a bit about the section of my life in which I was the most immersed in anti-racism, my influences, things that convinced me of certain ideas. And basically there was a section of my life in which I would say, looking back on it, I could have been branded anti-racist. And then in the third section, I want to share a little bit of my disillusionment with that, with it as a cultural movement, with some of its impact on discourse, some experiences I've had, some personal experiences I've had that have led to that further disillusionment. And then I'll share some takeaways, some concluding thoughts. So again, my background, just a little bit on that, my immersion into this way of thinking about the world, and then my disillusionment with it, and then where I'm at. So hopefully that'll be of interest to you. If you're trying to process your own, part of the reason I'm doing this is because I know a lot of people are trying to make sense of how people are talking about race and racism and justice and critical race theory and all that stuff. And so I just want to put this out there because it might help some people process just where they're at and what they're hearing and what they think. And I'm still on the journey too. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm 34 as I record this. It's not like I've completed anything, but I have come through some significant experiences and have developed some thoughts about it. So I'm just going to share those. show those here. So first of all, I grew up in a very small rural town in southern Pennsylvania. And I'm going to keep some of the details vague. Not that it would be that hard to figure some things out. But I grew up in a small, very white, very predominantly white rural town. My graduating class in high school, I graduated in 2004. And my graduating class was just under 200 people total in that class. That gives you a sense of the size of the town. I basically had no friends of color. Basically, I did have a few growing up in that town, but there virtually weren't any black people in my high school. A couple people that were of Hispanic background, or Latinx, I guess is the proper term for that now. But all that to say, most of my friends were white. I didn't like a lot of people who grew up with that background. I didn't really think about race that much. But importantly, as by way of background notes, I did have some very explicit encounters with explicitly racist ideas and thinking and attitudes, particularly in high school. I was debating whether to share specifics, but a couple specifics. I overheard some girls in a study hall talking about how they thought it would be disgusting to have sex with a black man. I overheard that. I wasn't in the conversation, but it hit me. In one of the most egregious examples of this was a woman. These happen to be examples of women, although I could share stories of guys I knew, telling jokes and things like that. But one of the more egregious examples was in my civics class in 10th grade. I remember it very clearly because it was so striking, but a young woman actually expressed in front of the whole class, which also indicates to you something about the culture, the fact that she felt okay saying this. There were certainly no black people in the room when she said this, but it also, she felt comfortable saying this with the teacher standing up front too. She said that she thought the fact that our nation recognized Martin Luther King as a holiday, in a holiday, was a disgrace. Because she was raised to not like black people and she didn't think they were equal, and the fact that we celebrated someone who tried to advance the rights of black people she just thought was wrong and a disgrace. She said that in front of the whole class. And I thought, and so I graduated in 2004, so this is 2002, right? And I just thought, oh my word, like, it was unsettling, deeply unsettling to me. And that's the other thing I want to say, is that I was unsettled by these experiences. So I had some awareness of the wrongness of the things I was hearing. Also, incidentally, it was very common to see the Confederate flag in my high school growing up, to the extent that actually my senior year, the administration banned the Confederate flag in terms of clothing and paraphernalia, and there was a big kind of outcry against that decision. Because a lot of people thought their free speech was being trampled on and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, just to paint a little bit of the cultural background that I come out of. So I was aware enough to be uncomfortable and unsettled by these experiences, but I didn't do anything about it. I very rarely, I can think of one particular experience in which I challenged a close friend who was saying things that I was not comfortable with about race. But that was one mild experience in which I vocalized any opposition. Otherwise, I just didn't say anything. I just sat in the room and kind of listened, was uncomfortable, but just kind of hoped it would go away. And I went about my experience. So that was high school. That's what I came out of. Then I went to college, and I went to college from 2004 to 2008. Went to a very small, again, largely white, small private Christian school in Indiana. And while I did not have much cultural exposure at that time to people of color directly, I had some friends, I did have some in terms of proximity and relationship to people, but it was still a largely white context. But importantly, in that in those 4 years, I did have two. I'm not going to name them, just because I don't know if I don't know if that'd be okay. But I did have two members of the administration, not faculty in this case, but two members of the administration at my undergrad who had very, very significant impact on me in this topic. Both of them were white men, and they both planted seeds that took root in me to challenge some of the cultural assumptions I had, some of the ways that kind of a white normativity, to use the buzzword, like a white normative kind of gaze on the world. They really challenged, in the context of this small private Christian, largely white school, in evangelical school, they planted these seeds that really took root in me and started to give me some language and started to push against some of the things that I grew up with, and started to give me some language for the experiences I was having looking back on my high school years, which I just talked about. So those two mentors planted those seeds, and very thoughtful, very intelligent, recommended books. One of them recommended, I wouldn't go on to read it until later, but recommended Beverly Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Just really, really interesting conversations. I started to tease this stuff out in college. And then there was a significant event, it was my senior year. Ed Gilbreth, who is a writer, someone I respect a lot. He's written two books, Reconciliation Blues and Birmingham Revolution, both of which I've read, both of which I would recommend, particularly if you're a Christian. But he came and spoke at a chapel service at my undergrad, talked about race. I think it was on the heels of Reconciliation Blues being published. And he talked about race, and he did it in a really gentle way, but also in a way in which he knew he knew he was a black man stepping into this tiny evangelical, largely white school, and you could tell, I can look back on it and can tell he knew he was walking on eggshells in some ways, but he still went into challenge, and he stirred some things up. It was a great talk. I remember, it was the fact that I still remember it as one of the chapel services. I went to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these chapel services over my 4 years there. And the fact that I remember this one is significant. So I still remember it, and I remember going back to the dorm afterwards and getting into a pretty heated conversation with a few younger students in the hallway outside my room who were upset by the things that he had said, and used language like the fact that he had played the race card, and like he had recounted some experiences and was trying to explain the psychological burden of being a black man, and constantly wondering if the experiences you're having are just constantly wondering if the fact that you're having them is because of race or not. So he was recounting and he was vulnerably confessing that like just carrying that burden and having to constantly question that is part of the experience of being black, in America at least. And these students were upset about that. And they thought that he was, like I said, quote, playing the race card and unnecessarily making things confrontational and making white people feel bad, and like all the standard responses that you'll hear. And I pushed back hard in that conversation, and maybe too hard. I was maybe reacting out of my own anger, frustration, I might have been carrying my own guilt for not speaking in those other experiences earlier, which is something I'm going to get back to when I get to the end of this whole journey, right? But I pushed back hard. It was one of the first times I very, very, very vocally spoke against what I was hearing. In that sense, it was a tough conversation, and I don't know that I changed anyone's mind in that setting, but it's a prominent experience in my mind. So that was about 2008. This is already taking longer than I expected, so I'm gonna have to break this into several videos. But in terms of my continued background, I then went to grad school right out of that, from 2008 to 2010, and this is where some of those seeds that got planted by those mentors started to really grow. And I went to grad school, also importantly, went to grad school at a state school, still in Indiana, but it was much larger. It was a state school, and it was not faith-based or religiously affiliated at all, which is also a significant point. So I was starting to have classes. I had finally had actual friends of color. Like, it was the first time probably one of the first times I would say I developed fairly close friendships with some black people, honestly. And not to mention gay people, Jewish people, just much more diverse cohort that I was suddenly immersed in. And this, of course, had a big impact on me. But also some of the curriculum that I was in, I was studying student affairs, student administration. So I was studying to be in, academic advising, housing and res life, student conduct, that whole branch of kind of administration at the higher education level. That's what I was studying for 2 years. And so I was immersed in a cohort that was learning about these things. And incidentally, if you don't know this, a lot of people I don't think know this, but in the world of higher ed, the world of student administration is really where a lot of this diversity, multicultural, inclusion, anti-racism now, a lot of that stuff is in that world in a thick way. So I was really immersed in this in my graduate program. And it makes sense if you stop and think about it, because think about people like RAs in dorms. A lot of the social justice, justice-oriented, inclusion, equity, a lot of that stuff is really, really trained into people like RAs and administrators on campus because of the world of conduct and all of that stuff. So I was really immersed in this. A lot of it was new to me. And I started, so I mentioned Beverly Tatum. I finally read that book, Beverly Tatum's book, Why All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria. Awesome book, recommend it highly if you haven't read it. It's a classic in this subject. I read that finally, but then in my curriculum, I read books like Pedagogy That Pressed. I read Bell Hooks for the first time. Actually, I think I have her book up. Yeah, one of her books, Teaching to Transgress, right behind me. And so these were writers that I'd never been exposed to at all before. And they were kind of blowing my mind, talking about things in such a new way, giving language to some things that I had seen culturally. So it was a powerful, formative time for me. The curriculum and the reading on top of the relationships that I had, and good relationships with people that I had that were kind of knocking down some blinders. And I was gaining some, I mentioned the language piece, I was gaining language for things like systemic issues. I think the first time I talked about things like social narratives and systemic anything was in grad school. I was wrestling with these ideas for the first time, being exposed to these critical, radical scholars. It was it was fantastic, honestly. It was a fantastic time, really nourishing to my mind, nourishing relationally to new people. And I was suddenly just learning all this stuff and gaining a new perspective on where I had come from, the small town and the culture in which I had grown up. So the seeds that had been planted by these mentors, in this case these Christian mentors in my undergraduate experience, were starting to gain the seeds were planted and they were gaining intellectual watering and then relational nourishment. And I was growing in passion for understanding the experiences of people who had different experiences than me, people who had grown up in different situations, people who had different identities than me, and also getting passionate about how my own identity, my own way of kind of existing in the world as a guy, as a straight guy, as a white Christian, to write down all the check boxes there, right? How those things had shaped my own view of the world in certain ways, and I wanted to learn how other people were seeing the world in a way different from me. So I think I'm going to pause the video here and maybe this might turn into 3 videos. I didn't really intend for that, but that is my whole background. That's where I came from, some of the scholars that I started to read, some of the materials I started to read that prepared me for my next step, which was going to be a full immersion into anti-racism. So that'll be video number 2. Thanks for watching.